Hello, this is Morel Bernard with the continuation of the story, Dracula. Last words were that his wife was aroused by the quick movement and turned to him with her arms stretched out as though to embrace him instantly, however. She drew them in again and putting her elbows together, held her hands before her face and shuddered till the bed beneath her shook. Please subscribe to the channel Study Coach UK and please share. I will continue with the story of Dracula. In God's name, what does this mean? Harker cried out. Dr. Seward, Dr. Van Hessling, what is it? What has happened? What is wrong? Mina, dear, what is it? What does that blood mean? My God, has it come to this? And raising himself to his knees, he beat his hands widely together. Good God, help us, help her, oh help her. With a quick movement he jumped from the bed and began to pull on his clothes, all the man in him awake at the instant exertion. What has happened? Tell me about it, he cried without pausing. Dr. Hessling, you love Mina. I know. Oh, do something to save her. It cannot have gone too far yet. Guard her while I look for him. His wife, through her terror and horror and distress, saw some sure danger to him. Instantly forgetting her own grief, she seized hold of him and cried out, No, no, Jonathan, you must not leave me. I have suffered enough tonight. God knows, without the dread of his harming you, you must stay with me. Stay with these friends who will watch over you. Her expression became frantic as she spoke, and he yielded to her. She pulled him down, sitting on the bed aside, and clung to him fiercely. Van Hessling and I tried to calm them both. The professor held up his little golden crucifix and said, with wonderful calmness, Do not fear, my dear. We are here. And whilst this is close to you, no foul thing can approach. You are safe for tonight, and we must be calm and take counsel together. She shuddered and was silent, holding down her head on her husband's breast. When she raised it, his white night robe was stained with blood where her lips had touched, and where the thin open wound in her neck had sent forth drops. The instant she saw it, she drew back with a low wail and whispered amidst choking sobs, Unclean, unclean. I must touch him or kiss him no more. Oh, that it should be that it is I who am now his worst enemy and whom he may have most cause to fear. To this he spoke out resolutely. Nonsense, Mina. It is a shame to me to hear such a word. I would not hear it of you, and I shall not hear it from you. May God judge me by my deserts and punish me with more bitter suffering than even this hour, if by any act or will of mine anything ever come between us. He put out his arms and folded her to his breast, and for a while she lay there sobbing. He looked at us over her bowed head, with eyes that blinked damply above his quivering nostrils. His mouth was set as steel. After a while her sobs became less frequent and more faint, and then he said to me, speaking with a studied calmness which I felt tried his nervous power to the utmost. And now, Dr. Seward, tell me all about it. Too well I know the broad fact. Tell me all that has been. I told him exactly what had happened, and he listened with seeming impassiveness. but his nostril twitched and his eyes blazed as I told how the ruthless hands of the Count had held his wife in that terrible and horrid position, with her mouth to the open wound in his breast. It interested me, even at that moment, to see that whilst the face of white set passion worked convulsively over the bowed head, the hands, tenderly and lovingly, stroked the ruffled hair. Just as I had finished, Quincy and Golderman knocked at the door. They entered in obedience to our summons. Van Helsing looked at me questioningly. I understood him to mean if we were to take advantage of their coming to divert, if possible, the thoughts of the unhappy husband and wife from each other and from themselves. So in nodding acquiescence to him, he asked them what they had seen or done, to which Lord Godalming answered, I could not see him anywhere in the passage, or in any of our rooms. I looked in the study, but though he had been there, he had gone. He had, however. He stopped suddenly, looking at the poor, drooping figure on the bed. Van Helsing said gravely, Go on, friend Arthur. We want here no more concealments. Our hope now is in knowing all. Tell freely. So Art went on. He had been there, and though he could only have been for a few seconds, he made rare hay of the place. All the manuscripts had been burnt, and the blue flames were flickering amongst the white ashes. The cylinders of your phonograph, too, were thrown on the fire, and the wax had helped the flames. Here I interrupted. Thank God there is the other copy in the safe. His face lit for a moment, but fell again as he went on. I ran downstairs then, but could see no sign of him. I looked into Renfield's room, but there was no trace there except. Again he paused. Go on, said Harker hoarsely. So he bowed his head and, moistening his lips with his tongue, added, Except that the poor fellow is dead. Mrs. Harker raised her head. Looking from one to the other of us, she said solemnly, God's will be done. I could not but feel that Art was keeping back something, but as I took it that it was with a purpose, I said nothing. Van Helsing turned to Morris and asked, And you, friend Quincy, have you any to tell? A little, he answered. It may be much eventually, but at present I can't say. I thought it well to know, if possible, where the Count would go when he left the house. I did not see him, but I saw a bat rise from Renfield's window and flap westward. I expected to see him in some shape go back to Carfax, but he evidently sought some other lair. He will not be back tonight, for the sky is reddening in the east and the dawn is close. We must work tomorrow. He said the latter words through his shut teeth. For a space of perhaps a couple of minutes there was silence, and I could fancy that I could hear the sound of our hearts beating. Then Van Helsing said, placing his hand very tenderly on Mrs. Harker's head, And now, Madame Mina, poor dear Madame Mina, tell us exactly what happened. God knows that I do not want that you be pained, but it is need that we know all. For now more than ever has all work to be done quick and sharp, and in deadly earnest. The day is close to us that must end all, if it may be so, and now's the chance that we may live and learn. The poor dear lady shivered, and I could see the tension of her nerves as she clasped her husband closer to her and bent her head lower and lower, still on his breast. Then she raised her head proudly and held out one hand to Van Esslin, who took it in his, and after stooping and kissing it reverently, held it fast. The other hand was locked in that of her husband, who held his other arm thrown round her protectingly. After a pause in which she was evidently ordering her thoughts, she began. I took the sleeping draught, which you had so kindly given me, but for a long time it did not act. I seemed to become more wakeful, and myriads of horrible fancies began to crowd in upon me, all of them connected with death and vampires, with blood and pain and trouble. Her husband involuntarily groaned as she turned to him and said lovingly, "Do not fret, dear. You must be brave and strong and help me through the horrible task. If you only knew what an effort it is to me to tell of this fearful thing at all, you would understand how much I need your help." Well, I saw I must try to help the medicine to its work with my will, if it was to do me any good. So I resolutely set myself to sleep. Sure enough, sleep must soon have come to me, for I remember no more. Jonathan coming in had not waked me, for he lay by my side when next I remember. There was in the room the same thin white mist that I had before noticed. But I forget now if you know of this. You will find it in my diary, which I shall show you later. I felt the same vague terror which had come to me before, and the same sense of some presence. I turned to wake Jonathan, but found that he slept so soundly that it seemed as if it was he who had taken the sleeping draught, and not I. I tried, but I could not wake him. This caused me great fear, and I looked around, terrified. Then, indeed, my heart sank within me, beside the bed, as if he had stepped out of the mist, or rather as if the mist had turned into his figure, for it had entirely disappeared. Stood a tall, thin man, all in black. I knew him at once from the description of the others. The waxen face, the high aquiline nose on which the light fell in a thin white line, the parted red lips, and the sharp white teeth showing between, and the red eyes that I had seemed to see in the sunset on the windows of St. Mary's Church at Whitby. I knew, too, the red scar on his forehead where Jonathan had struck him. For an instant my heart stood still, and I would have screamed out, only that I was paralyzed. In the pause he spoke in a sort of keen, cutting whisper, pointing as he spoke to Jonathan. Silence. If you make a sound, I shall take him and dash his brains out before your very eyes. I was appalled and was too bewildered to do or say anything. With a mocking smile, he placed one hand upon my shoulder and, holding me tight, bared my throat with the other, saying as he did so, "First, a little refreshment to reward my exertions. You may as well be quiet. It is not the first time, or the second, that your veins have appeased my thirst." I was bewildered, and strangely enough, I did not want to hinder him. I suppose it is a part of the horrible curse that such is when his touch is on his victim. And oh, my God, pity me. He placed his reeking lips upon my throat. Her husband groaned again. He clasped his hand harder and looked at him pityingly, as if he were the injured one, and went on. I felt my strength fading away, and I was in a half swoon. How long this horrible thing lasted I know not, but it seemed that a long time must have passed before he took his foul, awful, sneering mouth away. I saw it drip with the fresh blood. The remembrance seemed for a while to overpower her, and she drooped and would have sunk down but for her husband's sustaining arm. With a great effort she recovered herself and went on. Then he spoke to me mockingly. And so you, like the others, would play your brains against mine. You would help these men to hunt me and frustrate me in my designs. You know now, and they know in part already, and will know in full before long what it is to cross my path. They should have kept their energies for use closer to home. Whilst they played wits against me who commanded nations and intrigued for them and fought for them hundreds of years before they were born. I was come to mine in them. And you, their best beloved one, are now to me flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, kin of my kin, my bountiful wine press for a while, and shall be later on my companion and my helper. You shall be avenged in turn, for not one of them but shall minister to your needs. But as yet you are to be punished for what you have done. You have aided in thwarting me, now you shall come to my call. When my brain says come to you, you shall cross land or sea to do my bidding, and to do that end this. With that he pulled open his shirt, and with his long sharp nails opened a vein in his breast. When the blood began to spurt out, he took my hands in one of his, holding them tight, and with the other seized my neck and pressed my mouth to the wound, so that I must either suffocate or swallow some of the... Oh my God, my God, what have I done? What have I done to deserve? What have I done to deserve such fate? I, who have tried to walk in meekness and righteousness all my days. God pity me. Look down on a poor soul in worse than mortal peril, and in mercy pity those to whom she's dear. Then she began to rub her lips as though to cleanse them from pollution. And she was telling her terrible story. The eastern sky began to quicken, and everything became more and more clear. Harker was still and quiet, but over his face, as the awful narrative went on, came a grey look which deepened and deepened in the morning light, till when the first red streak of the coming dawn shot up, the flesh stood darkly out against the whitening hair. We have arranged that one of us is to stay within call of the unhappy pair, till we can meet together and arrange about taking action. Of this I'm sure. The sun rises today on no more miserable house in all the great round of its daily course. Jonathan Harker's Journal, 3rd October. As I must do something or go mad, I write this diary. It is now 6 o'clock, and we are to meet in the study in half an hour and take something to eat. For Dr. Van Hestlin and Dr. Seward are agreed that if we do not eat, we cannot work our best. Our best will be, God knows, required today. I must keep writing at every chance, for I dare not stop to think. All big and little must go down. Perhaps at the end the little things may teach us most. The teaching, big or little, could not have landed Mina or me anywhere worse than where we are today. However, we must trust and hope. Poor Mina told me just now, with the tears running down her dear cheeks, that it is in trouble and trial that our faith is tested, that we must keep on trusting, and that God will aid us to the end. The end, oh my God. What end? To work, to work. When Dr. Van Hestlin and Dr. Seward had come back from seeing poor Renfield, we went gravely into what was to be done. First, Dr. Seward told us that when he and Dr. Van Hestlin had gone down to the room below, they had found Renfield lying on the floor, all in a heap. His face was all bruised and crushed in, and the bones of the neck were broken. Dr. Seward asked the attendant who was on duty in the passage if he had heard anything. He said that he had been sitting down. He confessed to half dozing when he heard loud voices in the room, and then Renfield had called out loudly several times, "God, God, God." After that, there was a sound of falling, and when he entered the room he found him lying on the floor, face down, just as the doctor had seen him. Van Hestlin asked if he had heard voices, or a voice, and he said he could not say, that at first it had seemed to him as if there were two, but as there was no one in the room, it could have been only one. He could swear to it, if required, that the word God was spoken by the patient. Dr. Seward said to us when we were alone that he did not wish to go into the matter. The question of an inquest had to be considered, and it would never do to put forward the truth, as no one would believe it. As it was, he thought that on the attendant's evidence he could give a certificate of death by misadventure and falling from bed. In case the coroner should demand it, there would be a formal inquest necessary to the same result. When the question began to be discussed as to what should be our next step, the first thing was decided was that Mina should be in full confidence, that nothing of any sort, no matter how painful, should be kept from her. She herself agreed as to its wisdom, and it was pitiful to see her so brave and yet so sorrowful, and in such a depth of despair. There must be no concealment, she said. Alas, we have had too much already. And besides, there is nothing in all the world that can give me more pain than I have already endured, than I suffer now. Whatever may happen, it must be of new hope or of new courage to me. Van Hestlin was looking at her fixedly as she spoke, and said suddenly but quietly, "But dear Madame Mina, are you not afraid, not for yourself, but for others, from yourself, after what has happened?" Her face grew set in its lines, but her eyes shone with the devotion of a martyr as she answered, "Ah, no, for my mind is made up." "To what?" he asked gently, whilst we were all very still, for each in one way we had a sort of vague idea what she meant. Her answer came with direct simplicity, as though she were simply stating a fact. Because if I find in myself that I shall watch keenly for it, a sign of harm to any that I love, I shall die. You would not kill yourself? He asked hoarsely. I would, if there were no friend who loved me, who would save me such a pain, and so desperate an effort. She looked at him meaningly as she spoke. He was sitting down, but now he rose and came closer to her and put his hand on her head as he said solemnly, My child, there is such an one if it were for your good. For myself, I could hold it in my account with God to find such an euthanasia for you, even at this moment, if it were best. Nay, were it safe. But my child, for a moment he seemed choked, and a great sob rose in his throat. He gulped it down and went on. They are here, some who would stand between you and death. You must not die. You must not die by any hand, but least of all by your own. Until the other, who has fouled your sweet life, is true dead, you must not die, for if he is still with a quick undead, your death would make you even as he is. No, you must live. You must struggle and strive to live, though death would seem a boon unspeakable. You must fight death himself, though he come to you in pain or in joy, by the day or the night, in safety or in peril. On your living soul I charge you that you do not die, nay, nor think of death, till this great evil be past. The poor dear grey white as death, and shock and shivered, as I have seen a quicksand shake and shiver at the incoming of the tide. We were all silent. We could do nothing. At length she grew more calm, and turning to him said sweetly, but oh, so sorrowfully, as she held out her hand, I promise you, my dear friend, that if God will let me live, I shall strive to do so till, if it may be in his good time, his horror, this horror, may have passed away from me. She was so good and brave that we all felt that our hearts were strengthened to work and endure for her, and we began to discuss what we were to do. I told her that she was to have all the papers in the safe, and all the papers or diaries and phonographs as we might hereafter use, and was to keep the record as she had done before. She was pleased with the prospect of anything to do, if pleased could be used in connection with so grim an interest. Join me do join me for the next episode of Dracula. Join me, Morel, for the next episode of Dracula. See you in the next video. Look out for the next video. I'll see you then. Bye.